Many types of exploration games will require you to inspect items, okay, to find clues in a puzzle game, or maybe to uncover some information about an event that occurred in a horror game. So to do this, we can simply look at an object and left click on it, and that will inspect it. It'll open up the inspection window right here with a little description down here that you can define. So maybe this could be the player's thoughts or an objective description of the object. And then we can click and drag to rotate it around. We can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. And then when we're done inspecting, we can right click to exit. So we can inspect pretty much any item we have here on the table, and they each have their corresponding sounds as well. Now, as well as this, we also have notes that we can inspect. So for example, these might be a bit hard to read here, so we can simply click on them to inspect them like so. And this is good because it doesn't require us to set up a separate note system. We can use the interaction system for notes as well. Now, not only can you inspect items, but you can also interact with them while inspecting. So for example, we have a book and a matchbox here. If I open up the matchbox to inspect it, you'll see that if I hover over this drawer, a little door icon appears. And if I click, that is going to open up the matchbox like so. So you can have interactions that occur inside of the inspect screen. And this allows you to make things such as puzzle boxes, where you might have little drawers and buttons and levers. And a lot of the components that the toolkit has to offer, such as doors, in this case for the little drawer right here, buttons, you could even have keypads and combination locks that work when inspected. Same thing with this book here. You'll see it has a little latch. If I hover over it, it is going to open up the book like a little door right there. And you could then have an item, for example, that the player might hover over and click to add to their inventory. So that was a look at inspecting items. Let's now hop over to the inspector and have a look at how these are set up. So, how do we actually go about creating an inspectable item? Well, let's have a look at something simple. Let's look at the trophy right here. So on the trophy, we first of all need an interactable component. The interactable component is what is going to actually be able to detect when we are looking at it. So here we are essentially just setting the crosshair to be the magnifying glass, so it changes when we look at it. We also then have a box collider to detect that raycast. And then we have the inspectable component. Now the inspectable component, basically attach this to an object with interactable and you can inspect it. Now here we have a few things. First of all, the inspect description. This is what appears at the bottom of the screen when we inspect it. The inspect pivot is basically the pivot point that we want to rotate this object around. You'll see here, I have an empty game object positioned in the middle of the trophy. So when we rotate the trophy, it does not rotate around its base game object pivot point, but rather around this one in the center. And then we have inspect rotation. This is basically just a starting rotation. For example, on the key right here, you'll see that its inspect rotation is offset, so the key is on a bit of an angle when we open it up. And then we have inspect scale, and this is going to basically change the scale of the object when we're inspecting it. For things such as keys, which are very small, or this chess piece, you might want to increase them in a scale here. And this, of course, gets reset when you stop inspecting it. And then we have colliders to disable. When we inspect something, you might have collisions that you don't want to occur. So for example, here we are essentially just disabling the keys collider when inspecting it. And then down here for sounds, we can have a begin inspect sound and an end inspect sound. So here for the key, we just have that sound effect play. And you can also choose to use a global audio source or a referenced audio source. Global audio source is essentially a prefab you can add to the scene right here, which is a singleton with an audio source attached to it, so it plays a global sound. And it just prevents you from having hundreds and hundreds of audio sources in your scene if you don't need them. Now, notes are set up in the exact same way as you can see here. The only things that differ are going to be the ones with complex interaction. So let's have a look at the matchbox right here. So essentially on the matchbox, it behaves the exact same way. We have the inspectable, but inside of the matchbox, if we click on its drawer here, you'll see that this right here has a mesh collider, and it has an interactable and a door script. Now, you can go over to the door video to learn more about how doors work, but essentially on the interactable, we have set the method here to be cursor. This means that we can only open this drawer if we are using our mouse cursor, which gets enabled when we inspect an object. Now, you can't just attach the interactable script to a game object and it works. We first of all have to go ahead to our player controller and attach the inspect controller prefab. And this can be found in core prefabs controllers. And when you attach the inspect controller, make sure on the player components you have assigned it here, okay, as other components may need a reference to it. Now, on the inspect controller, there are a number of properties. First of all, we have the inspect camera, and this right here is a camera, which is a child of the controller, and if we enable it, you'll see down below our scene here, we have that camera rendering. Now, the reason why we do this is because we don't want anything getting in the way of when we are inspecting an object. So this camera essentially is an overlay camera. As you can see here, it's an overlay, and if you are adding the inspect controller, make sure that on your player's camera, you add it to the camera stack here. Otherwise, it won't be rendered. Now, on this overlay camera, it is essentially rendering a specific layer. So if there is anything down here, it won't be rendered. And that in the culling mask here is the inspect layer. Basically, this camera is only going to render objects that are on the inspect layer. And as a child of this, we have a canvas, which essentially is the background, the buttons and the information here. It also has a separate light game object, because we are basically giving the inspect items its own custom light, so you can easily tweak the sort of atmosphere you want when inspecting. And this also has a separate rendering layer. Okay, I've set the rendering layer for this to be light layer 1. And then we have the inspect parent, which the inspected object will be basically a child of, and this is then going to rotate around when we click and drag. Now, I mentioned the two things, okay, the inspect layer and the rendering layer mask. So these two things are very important because they basically take the object outside of the game scene in a way and put it in its own self-contained environment. Now, you don't need to worry about switching your game object over to the inspect layer. That is automatically done. Whenever we inspect, for example, the key or the trophy, that game object and all of its children game objects are going to have their layer switched to inspect. And on the mesh renderer, they're going to have their rendering layers switched over to light layer 1. And don't worry, these are going to reset to their previous values when it stops inspecting. So that is just the setup for the overlay camera right here. I recommend just going through the game object to learn how it works, maybe even jump into the script to have a better understanding. Now, on the inspect controller, we have some other properties. We have the zoom FOV, min zoom, max zoom, so we can zoom in and out, as well as rotate sensitivity for when we are rotating the object. And then down here, we have some UI components that we can assign. So that is the inspect controller. It allows us to inspect items. It allows us to interact with them as well. So yeah, hopefully you can figure out some pretty good uses for this in your game. If you're making a puzzle game, it's of course going to be very handy, but also for a horror, exploration, RPG, pretty much any game will have great use of the inspect system.